We've reached the point in naked government corruption where it's not even exciting news anymore. Half the country will see it and say, oh well, everybody makes mistakes, nobody's perfect, or even good. I'm glad that government power was weaponized against my political opponents. And the other half will see it and say, yeah, I knew about that 6 years ago, but thanks for confirming that my conspiracy theories were in fact accurate half a decade later. And that's if we even have that discussion at all. At this point, either because it's status quo or because there are political interests in downplaying it, it's not even major news in many major publications. The morning after, from the New York Times, no mention on the homepage. The Washington Post has a mention halfway down, just below trivia and write-in marital advice. CNN likewise buried, and characterizing the report as a failure. When I turned on TV news on Tuesday morning, it was mentioned as story 5 or 6, and as we'll get to, softened with assurances that any government abuse uncovered has since been corrected. And you can be confident in that because, after all, the very same government abusers told us so. But yes, in apparent relative non-news, Special Counsel John Durham, appointed in 2019 by then Attorney General Bill Barr to investigate the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation, has now released the findings of his own 4-year investigation in a 300-plus page report. It is very thorough. If you're the citations please type of person, there are nearly 1,800 of them. But I think there are 5 main points to understand from it. 1. They had no evidence from the start and never did throughout. 2. They lied to your face about that evidence anyway. 3. There were clear political and self-protection interests in play. 4. The highest levels of government were in on it, or at least had knowledge of it and did nothing to try to stop it. And 5, despite all of that, despite an actual conspiracy to subvert the will of the people, the entire premise on which our Constitution is based, there will almost certainly be absolutely no consequences for any of that whatsoever. Instead of Judgment Day in D.C., we'll just get Tuesday, the day after the report was released, the report that nobody actually read anyway. But even if that is how this develops, it doesn't mean that we as citizens should forgo knowledge of it, because after all, despite this evidence of an actual election interference campaign just 2 cycles ago, we're supposed to believe that all the lessons have been learned and all the problems have been fixed, and there is no way that this is going to happen again next time. Well, it might be wise for us to learn what to watch out for just in case. So to those points, point 1, and this report's most significant in my judgment, is that despite the fact that Russian collusion may be the single most repeated phrase in American politics over the last decade, the FBI never had a shred of evidence for it. Durham says, quote, "Neither U.S. law enforcement nor the intelligence community appears to have possessed any actual evidence of collusion, as in Trump-Russia collusion, in their holdings at the commencement of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, as in the Trump-Russia investigation. Start from the investigation's inception in July 2016, fast forward nearly 3 years of investigation later, and the Mueller report concluded the same thing. Mueller could not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. So there was no evidence day 1, and there was no evidence day 1000 either. But according to Durham's report, it's much worse than that. It's not just no evidence as in, whoopsie, we thought there might have been something there, but upon examination it turns out not. It's no evidence as in they knew it was crap the whole time, and they did it anyway. Durham says throughout the report, the FBI ignored or rationalized away evidence or leads against their theory, and had ample reason to believe their case was weak, to put it kindly. Total nonsense, to be blunt. Durham concludes that FBI personnel themselves did not genuinely believe that there was probable cause to suspect that Trump-Russia collusion had occurred. In the early stages of the investigation, agents on the case described it as, quote, thin, saying, quote, It sucks. The report details conversations with British intelligence counterparts who commented that the FBI agents on the case had nothing in their recordings of Carter Page and later refused to participate in the Mueller investigation, believing it was nonsense. Peter Strzok himself, leading the investigation at its inception, told a subordinate, quote, "There is nothing to this, but we have to run it to the ground," according to an FBI source in London. And if there was no evidence the whole time, and they knew there was no evidence the whole time, well, that's point two. They lied to your face about this supposed evidence the whole time. See the Adam Schiff montage.
Well, there's clear evidence on the issue of collusion, and this adds to that body of evidence. There's ample evidence of collusion in plain sight, and that is true.
Have Democrats found any evidence of collusion?
Yes, we have. And there is significant evidence of collusion. There is ample evidence, and indeed there is, of collusion of people in the Trump campaign with the Russians.
And as you see there, it wasn't just Adam Schiff saying he believed that there was evidence or that he suspected that there might be evidence. He said there was evidence and he had seen it. So, did he not share this evidence with the FBI or the special counsel, or did he just lie his ass off? I think we can confidently conclude, because it's different when you're a Democrat. That's what the D stands for, after all, or at least that's what the meme says. But the meme might as well have been a part of this report. That's point three, because even if Durham won't say it outright, this was all clearly political in nature. Instead of political motive, Durham identifies what he says is confirmation bias. The FBI focused on thin evidence for the case it wanted, while ignoring counter evidence against that case. But the question Durham doesn't answer is what, then, is the bias that was confirmed? To call these clues would be to entertain mystery where it doesn't exist. They were with her. In July 2016, before the investigation was launched, U.S. intelligence agencies, including the FBI, became aware of a Hillary Clinton campaign plan to stir up scandal against Donald Trump by tying him to Putin and the Russian hacking of the DNC. And not only was that information that they knew to have originated with the Clinton campaign the biggest piece of their case, but it appears that in trying to establish this Russian collusion narrative, the FBI, ironically, actually dismissed Russian intelligence that correctly diagnosed that this was all political in nature. But even if we wanted to believe that the FBI just thought that the Hillary campaign had really credible evidence, this wasn't political, it was just the pursuit of the truth, well, that doesn't explain why the FBI gave Hillary Clinton drastically different treatment for very similar allegations. Because the FBI knew that earlier in 2016, there was an allegation that the Clinton campaign had accepted an illegal campaign contribution from a foreign national, and the campaign was fully aware of it and, quote, okay with it, even offering to provide a receipt. That claim was never seriously investigated. In early 2016, there was a separate investigation into possible criminal activity at the Clinton Foundation. But on that investigation, then Deputy FBI Director Andy McCabe tried to shut it down, saying there's nothing to it. And later, the New York field office handling the investigation received a cease and desist order on behalf of then director Jim Comey, citing some undisclosed counterintelligence concern. So shut it down for Hillary Clinton and ramp it up for Donald Trump under conditions of the same general suspicion: foreign collusion in the election, all while they lied to our faces about that aspect of it too, of course.
Can you direct the Justice Department to say Hillary Clinton will be treated as the evidence goes, she will not be in any way protected?
I can guarantee that. Nobody gets treated differently when it comes to the Justice Department, because nobody is above the law.
Even if she ends up as the Democratic nominee?
How many times do I have to say it, Chris? Guaranteed.
And speaking of the former president, that is point four. Knowledge of the scheme was present throughout the highest powers of the federal government, again, from the start. Durham reveals that in August 2016, then CIA Director John Brennan briefed President Obama and Vice President Biden and others on the Clinton plan to vilify Donald Trump by linking him to Putin and Russia. They knew it was all political in origin. They knew the evidence never existed, but they were on board to try to use the institutions of government power in their political favor in 2016 and to sustain the lie through 2020. So the highest offices and power centers of the federal government were weaponized to try to sway an election away from the will of the people and toward their own corruption in what is surely one of the greater political scandals in this country's history, which brings us to point 5. What will happen? Well, unfortunately, but almost certainly, a whole lot of nothing. Durham's report does not recommend any additional prosecutions, and he went 0 for 2 on the ones that went to trial, plus 1 guilty plea for evidence tampering. Instead, Durham offers a stern talking to in the form of 2 paragraphs about how the FBI might reform, to which the FBI responds, well, that is great, because we already did. The FBI released a statement saying, hey, sorry about all those missteps, but we've implemented dozens of corrective actions since then, so don't worry about it anymore. For example, now if the FBI wants to get political again, well, they're going to have to clear it with the not at all political Attorney General first.
The FBI says it long ago overhauled how it handles national security investigations in response to that earlier Inspector General's report. And the Attorney General now has to personally approve probes into national political campaigns.
Because who could possibly envision the Attorney General also being a completely corrupt political actor, even though the Attorney General was part of the briefing the last time this happened and did absolutely nothing to stop it. And even though the current guy considers you terrorist adjacent if you're somewhat impolite in your discussions with your school board about your kids' educational material. Don't worry though, because we're gonna get justice in the form that we always get it: Congressional Committee dunk contests. Jim Jordan has invited John Durham to testify next week, and so the battle of who gets the best 1-minute clip on Twitter will officially be on. And don't get me wrong, the pursuit of the truth is always worthwhile. I'm not saying that Jim Jordan shouldn't seek it, or anybody else for that matter. I'm saying that the truth is already discovered here. This is no longer a matter of inquiry. This is a matter of justice, and the question is how. Because unless we accept a stern talking to and a tisk-tisk finger swipe of shame and no prosecutions as sufficient, I see 2 options here. There is counter-weaponization or there is dismantling. Either we play the game on these terms and start opening our own investigations and attempting our own prosecutions in places where we hold power, like state attorneys general, for example, or we get serious about dismantling the game itself by electing a president and a Congress to do that, or I think more realistically and permanently, by an Article 5 Convention of States to undo this federal power center. Or, of course, by just wiping our hands of all of this and saying, sorry, we no longer recognize the legitimacy of these institutions, but sure, go ahead and come over here and try to demonstrate it to us if you'd like, or some combination of all of these approaches. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but none of the above is not an option if you'd like this abuse to stop. In other words, we can put on the ring or we can cast it into the fire, but we're not going to trust Sauron that he's taken our criticisms to heart and promises to be more judicious when deploying his orc army next time, or that just one more Shire investigation into orc abuses will finally do the trick and bring them into line. With an enemy bent on fighting and destroying you, combat and destruction are the only defense mechanisms that you have. But I don't know why I even make such ridiculous comparisons. Anyway, this is nothing like Lord of the Rings at all, obviously. I think, given the choice, we'd all much rather negotiate with the orcs, actually. It's far more realistic that they'd see some sense and compromise. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Gab. That is at MLR Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.